Welcome to the Leave No Doubt podcast. I'm very grateful that this episode has been sponsored by Connection Technologies. I'm even more grateful that I've been joined by a wonderful sports scientist. His name is Dan Nisbet, and at the moment he is the head of the FAW Sports Science. Dan, how are you doing?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Joe.
Listen, Dan, I thought it might be a nice way to start this podcast because the timing of which we're speaking is sort of middle of pre-season at the moment. So we're going to be really specific as to what pre-season looks like for you, what it looks like when you break it down from a sports science perspective. And, hopefully we'll be able to give people information that's going to help them get the best out of this pre-season. But I thought it might be a nice idea if you just give us a little bit of an intro into yourself, into your background and as to why you are where you are.
Yeah, so if I give it a real quick, brief snapshot of my journey, I did a sports science degree. I did a master's in sports science. Went straight out of university into rugby. I think that gave me a really good grounding and basis in the sport, in the game. I was at Saracens Rugby Club, so I spent 4 years there before moving into multi-sport. Worked with like a range of Olympic-based sports, swimming. I worked with netballers, and then before moving into football, my football journey began. I began at Bristol Rovers, the Bristol Rovers first team. That's where I met yourself. And spent 3 years there, 3 fun years there. I think 3 good learning years there for myself in football. At the same time, I started working for the English FA. So I joined the English FA and initially worked on the women's pathway before working for 4 years with the women's senior team. So I was with the Lionesses at the 2017 Euros and the 2019 World Cup. Before moving across in the English FA into the men's pathway, so working across, the 17s, 18s, 19s, 20s on the English FA. At the same time I was doing this, I was still working in club games. So I was working at Bristol Rovers before moving to Swansea City first team. Spent 4 seasons at Swansea City, including 2 playoffs. We didn't quite get over the line, but it was a great experience and a great learning experience for myself before making the switch across here to the Welsh FA, where I look after the men's and the women's teams, pathway teams.
So this will be the first year that you're actually not delivering a pre-season to anybody?
Yeah, this will be the first year actually in a long time that I've not actually had to deliver, but it's been quite nice to have the umbrella that stand back and the helicopter view of what's going on.
I've always wondered, obviously from a player's perspective, as to how we're talking about pre-season, but I'm always interested into how you understand what you understand, right, and how you deliver what you deliver as a sports scientist. Like, we've got fitness coaches all over the country that deliver certain runs to players, certain, obviously fitness sessions. For you specifically, what is the process of you understanding like what sessions you're going to do with players? Like, how do I know as a player that I'm being told to stand on one line and get to another line within a certain amount of time and then come back within a certain amount of time? How do I know that that's genuinely, beneficial to me?
Yeah, so I guess the way myself as a sports scientist and a practitioner thinks about it is it's a level of science, a level of applied science. I mean, there's certain scientific principles that we need to make sure that we are achieving or we're following to maximize what we're doing, really. And then there's a certain amount of art and I guess the individual practitioner's philosophy and putting into practice how the conditioning work might work or in their environment. I think about my environments at Bristol Rovers was completely different to the environment at Swansea City, just not only in terms of what facilities were available to me, but in terms of actually the coach's philosophy from like a football standpoint as well. So I think it's like a case of when you're conditioning players and you're running a pre-season program, there's certain elements based on science that you need to get, and then it's your philosophy and how you apply that into practice. Generally, be how I snapshot and overview the process.
So, see, obviously, when we're trying to break down pre-season, and I want to try and immediately, as quickly as I possibly can, get this conversation into being football specific. So I'd like you, if possible, like what's the difference now? Because obviously football fitness is one thing, right, and general fitness is another. And we're seeing players do a lot in the off season that they're coming back obviously super fit now. Coming back unfit pre-season is sort of gone, really. Like gone are the days of that happening. But what are the main differences, in your opinion, on the difference between general fitness and football specific fitness?
Yeah, so I guess if I touch on the point you made there, I think that in these off season these days, I don't think players can afford to just have 6 weeks of just doing nothing. I believe that players need a rest. They might have a couple of weeks rest before they start, building up a little bit of training load. But these days, when you've got a 6 week preseason, or sometimes less, like you need to actually be able to hit the ground running, and you're probably putting yourself at disservice if you haven't done some work or you haven't done some conditioning work going into that preseason, because you might end up having to be load managed, or you might not feel great during that preseason, or you might you actually be more at risk for getting an injury. So I think that's important. Then how the specifics of the conditioning. So how would you make it football specific? For me, I think when you're conditioning, we talk about, I'm going to talk about like high intensity interval training as being one. So I think a lot of the stuff you see out there or people will tend to go for that big long run, for example. But I think, when we start to think about the game, it's periodic in nature. There's high intensity actions, and those are probably going to be the actions that are the most costly to players, the ones we need to prepare players for. So, my recommendation would be to do, the actual interval training. And by that, I probably mean, so work around, I'm going to use the term MAS. Might not be familiar with it, or players might be familiar with it, but that's your maximal aerobic speed. So all that really tells us is, the at your max aerobic, what speeds do you run at, which is important because that gives us, if you want to then improve your aerobic capacity, that's a good speed to run at. So you find that you do work, and you've probably done it or seen it before, where it's like a 10 seconds on and a 10 seconds off, a 1-to-1 ratio, or even like a 10 seconds on and 20 seconds off. So that would be kind of like how I look to condition, and then adding on more specific football things, more specific high intensity interval training with sprint intervals where you go maximally for 20 seconds, around 20 seconds, 15, 20, 30 seconds. You go maximal effort, then you have a really big period of rest, 2 minutes, and then potentially some repeat speed works. We know it's specific to football important, where you do up to 10 seconds work, but you have a really short rest, and that's a maximal effort as well. And then you just repeat it again. So I guess that's kind of like the framework I look to work within.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from you there, Dan, is that you didn't say 5K or 10K or long distance once, really. You sort of broke down that off-season training that people can do as to not short bursts, but like obviously intervals where you're running at high speeds for certain amount of time, and then you're resting. And would you say that, like, where the 5Ks and 10Ks, and it got quite popular obviously during COVID and stuff, didn't it, that the guys were running long distance, like I myself was doing it, probably more so to pass the time really than anything else. But like, if you're preparing for a preseason or even in preseason, like are these long runs, like are they beneficial? Should people stay away from them? Like, where do they have a place in football, or not really?
Yeah, so I think, that's a really good point, actually. And I do think that there is a place for it, a longer run. So there's these longer runs, you're obviously going to be running slower, which means that you're going to be using potentially like a lower percentage of your, talk about that MAS again, lower percentage of your aerobic speed. So you're going to be working less hard, but it's probably going to be more about just creating the volume under your legs, the distance covered. And like probably one of my tips, 5K got really popular, but I think probably people will get more out if they kind of split that 5K a little bit. So if they want to do a bit of volume, and I think volume is important, but if you split that session, that 5K, into potentially 5 1Ks and run the 1K you run in the 5K, and so you might be able to run the 1K in 4 minutes, versus you were running the 5K in 5 minutes, kilometers. So you probably find that, actually splitting it will allow you to run that little bit faster, which will allow you to get that, that a little bit quicker or better conditioning effects from doing that work versus that big long run, because I guess we're not training middle distance runners. It's probably more of like about making sure that you've got the aerobic capacity and making sure that that is quite similar to the sport that you play.
And that's really interesting, actually, that you're suggesting that breaking down a 5K into 5 1Ks is arguably more beneficial to a football player than what just trying to bash out a quick 5K would be.
Yeah, I would. Due to the speed that you run at. So there's a speed that they call it a critical velocity. It's 87% of the MAS. But if you probably are going to really struggle. The top elite runners and not many footballers are really there, will struggle to run at that pace for that long. But you might be able to get there if you're doing 3 or 4 or 5 minutes work. Actually pick up the speed, run it a bit faster, run that K a bit faster. And then do 4 or 5 blocks. You're going to end up with your 5K distance. So we've got the volume underneath you, but you've probably run at a speed that's a bit more appropriate to developing your aerobic system versus just going out for a run.
Yeah, that makes sense. And something I've always been interested in is because I do a lot of that interval stuff on a treadmill. What the difference is, or is there any benefit in going on a treadmill rather than running? I can't imagine that there is. I can imagine being obviously on the grass, or like a lot of guys in off seasons or pre seasons will have to run on the road, which is which may have a negative effect on people's bodies. But can you give me a bit of an insight, mate, as to, is there a difference between doing these sort of runs on a treadmill as to like on the grass, or which is better for you? Like, are you actually of like these treadmill runs? Are they actually any good? Like, what's sort of like the science that goes on behind that?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to like that specificity. So like making sure it's specific to the actions that we're going to be doing. So actually the best case scenario will be to run on grass, because it's going to be the same surface. It's going to be the same. That you're going to be training on every single day. You're going to be playing on every single day, and then when you take off. When you go onto the road's going to be harder. It's going to probably be a different impact on that foot, on your lower legs. And versus the treadmill is obviously going to be harder, going to have a bit of bounce to it. So, actually, if you can, I would 100% try and keep your conditioning to the same place, keep it to the grass if possible. I know that's not necessarily like in the off season when we've jetted off to somewhere hot. It's not probably going to be the case. So, it actually, as long as you're careful and listen to your body and make sure that, actually, one day I've done that and I feel horrible the next day, and you probably give yourself a bit of extra rest around that. But I say try and keep it as specific as possible. It's one thing we do notice in the game. It's like, you think about it when even when you just train on grass, as soon as the pitches change, you get the rainy season, you get autumn coming, and the pitches get soft. It's one time that we, as a major flag for like a sports scientist, because you're like, actually, this is when we get probably more calf injuries. It's due to literally the change of surface, because your body just gets used to what it's used to, right? So I would definitely try to keep it on the grass. But if you can't, you can do some road work, you can do some running work. Just be sensible, listen to your body. You probably know yourself if you react when you go onto the pavement versus going on the grass. And then another little tip, I'm thinking about the actual treadmills. One thing, when you do a treadmill run, you're not actually running into anything. There's no like air resistance or anything like that. So, to try and get the best out of that treadmill, I think a little tip is to try and put on like a 1% incline or 0.5% incline. And that kind of gives you that little bit extra resistance to match what you might have been doing if you were running on the road or running on the grass.
Yeah, that makes sense. That incline thing's a little bit popular, isn't it? When people are obviously doing, different runs that are online and, jumping on and off the treadmill and stuff, they always say that obviously creating a bit of an incline is is beneficial to you. Something you touched on there that I'm eager to get into, because it's something that I've sort of had on my mind for a little while, is when you say like the change of surface can sometimes have a negative effect on people's bodies and things like calves. How are people able, do you, like in your opinion, to obviously to I guess bulletproof themselves from that sort of stuff? Like what can guys be doing, like exercise wise, that's going to help build, an element of robustness, I'd imagine, to like different surfaces, like different runs and things like that.
So I think it comes down to something that you can do to try and create that robustness. So what I guess you think about what we're doing in terms of football actions generally, or football, when you're talking about surfaces, it's all a level of impact, a level of strength requirement, a level of coordination required on for any of those actions. So if you're doing your strength work, your prehab work, that is going to increase the strength of your muscles. So then anything that you're doing on the pitch becomes a bit easier for them. So the way I like to think about it is, and this is from like a prehabby type thing, to help try and keep yourself fit and healthy, is you break down the lower body into calf work. You'll have a bit of hamstring work, you have a bit of quad work, and a bit of groin work, as in that general prehab stuff to keep your body going or keep your body ticking over. So it might be a case of a real simple test for a calf, and to see whether you've got the strength and the capacity in your calf, is just to do a single leg calf raise. So you try and do a tempo of 2 up, 2 down, really slow and controlled, full range, and can you do 20 reps? If you can't do 2 up, 2 down, or your reps don't go through full range, then actually there's probably a weakness there or a lack of capacity. So by doing a bit of calf work within your programs, within your training days, probably done after training, is going to strengthen those calves. So we're being specific about the pitches. I would do, assess their calf, do a bit of calf work. When the pitches get bad, I tend to do a load of ankle stability work with players. You picture the standing on one leg and make a star with the other leg, or standing on an unstable surface. That type of work, jumping catches. I think that's really important for actually just keeping that calf and that ankle healthy.
Welcome to the Leave No Doubt podcast. I'm so excited to welcome our new sponsors, Connection Technologies, a market leader in business-to-business tools ranging from business mobile, hosted telephony, and fixed line services. Head over to their website at www.connection-technologies.co.uk, fill in their inquiry web form, and find out how Connection Technologies can support your business moving forward.
Something that I've always been interested in, and obviously it's probably universal now around teams and players during pre-season, is this build-up of match day minutes, right? That we're all expected, obviously, to come the first game of the season, be able to play 90 minutes. But when guys are turning up back to pre-season fit now, like why are they not just playing 90 minutes from the get-go? Like, what is the benefit of this build-up of match day minutes that you see happen, across pre-season?
Yeah, I guess the first thing to probably think about is no matter how fit you are, and obviously being aerobically fit is going to, that's going to help you and benefit you. It's going to benefit you loads in terms of your recovery between actions in game, your recovery, between games and after games, and it's going to help you to obviously get to levels within the game. But I think when we think about the game of football, it's quite chaotic in nature, and there's going to be loads of change of directions. There's going to be striking balls. There's going to be loads of 1v1s, tussling, battling. Like it's a really specific event. It's something really different to anything you could probably quite replicate. You might replicate certain parts within your training session, but the game is always a little bit different. So I think when we think about that, the sensible approach, it wouldn't be just to go, let's go straight back into the hardest moment or the hardest 90 minutes, to actually have a sensible approach of building load and building exposure to those loads over time. So, generally you will go through a process of, play 45 minutes for your first game, play 60 minutes or 75 minutes in your second game, play 90 minutes in your third game, and build up your training load across your games back into pre-season. And probably what you find is your opposition level might change as well. Generally, we would plan for like the lower level opposition, and then going into the harder level of opposition the closer you get to the season, because you're obviously I think that relates back to the game a little bit as well in terms of the intensity. If you're playing a lower level opposition, is going to be a little bit lower, so a little bit more of an ease back into training. So I think that's probably why, like, you could be the fittest person, but you probably got to remember you've not done and many of those actions for a long time. So actually it's sensible to build it back in versus, go back in for 90 minutes and the fit person might be okay. Or they might come across an action that they haven't done and the body's not ready for it. And they might have to do that, multiple times throughout the game. So I think that's probably the mindset when we're planning that.
It's interesting, mate, obviously, that we're talking about building up match day minutes, right? And we're suggesting the players go from 45 minutes to 60 minutes and 75 minutes. But something, devil's advocate on that is, what if you're the player that's coming on after 60 minutes? What if you're the player that's coming on after 75 minutes and you're not actually getting the match day minutes that other players are getting? How are you going to be able to replicate, I suppose, those match day movements, those match day fitness experiences, I guess you can call it? Like, how are you going to be able to get the best out of pre-season if you're not actually playing as much as other people?
Yeah, so that's a really good point, actually, and I think a lot of programs now you'll try and plan, or definitely we'll try and plan enough games that it might be two teams, and then one team will be playing the 45, second team plays 45, one team plays 60, and the other play 30, and then it'll be a 30 and a 60 for the ones that didn't play that first game. So there's, I think a lot of teams will do that, but often, you will find the case that teams won't be able to do that. They won't be able to get the games, or you'll be that player who's not playing as much. And I think then you need to actually ensure that you are still doing your conditioning work and you're still doing your loading to that. So what we would do if there was a player that didn't play 60 minutes, there'd be a conditioning session after the game. And then there'd be a actual football session the day after the game to make sure that they are getting their specific loading, and they're not just losing out because they didn't play that first one, because that player could be the player that ends up starting the first game, or they've got to be ready to start the game and they've got to still get fit. So that's how we would probably condition players and look after them.
And obviously we're talking like you're working with players that have access to a sports scientist, right? But how do guys that don't have access to a sports scientist know how much they should be doing? And that sort of leads me into my next bit, is in, like, obviously we're talking about work that you should be doing in pre-season, but at what point, in your opinion, do you think that that you should be able to rest or recover?
Yeah, so I guess the first point about how much should they be doing, if you say for example a game is 90 minutes and players will typically run 10 to 12k or cover the distance of 10 to 12k in that game. If you've only played 30 minutes, I do think you probably need to be making sure that you try and make up the time at some point. And I'm not saying you're going to do 60 minutes worth of conditioning, but you might actually do after the game 15-20 minutes worth of actual conditioning work, running work, and then the next day you probably go and try and do a football session if you can for 45 minutes. If I'm obviously a player that's not able to train with my team plays or trains part-time, the way I'd look at it would be to get their conditioning. So it might be the interval work that I spoke about after the game, and then the next day the longer intervals, the 1k work, you might try and get a little bit of volume in your legs, which you've missed from the game, with a little bit more specific conditioning at the end of it, the high interval training at the end of it. So I'd probably try and get that into the system. Talk about recovery.
Yeah, just before you get into recovery, Dan, I might stop you there, mate. Just because before we get into that, you touched on a point there that's quite interesting. As you mentioned part time, and obviously, like, it's just something that I've found myself falling into, obviously because of an opportunity, obviously outside of football. I know a lot of the guys that listen to this podcast will obviously play part time and won't be training in a full time environment. What is a couple of times a week training and a game on a weekend? Is that enough for people to get the best out of themselves in pre-season, or do they need to be doing more? Like, when should they do more? Is it is it, if it's 3 days a week? Is it the Monday or the Wednesday or the Friday? Say, for example, it'd be nice to get a bit of an insight really as to how, I suppose, part-time players can stay as fit or get as fit. Arguably, probably won't get as fit as full-time players, but how they can still get something out of pre-season. Like, is 2 times a week enough?
Yeah, so actually, I don't think it is. I don't think if you're training twice a week and you're having that one game on the weekend, I don't think it's going to get you fitter or as fit quicker. So I would definitely, if I was working in part-time football, if I was in part-time football, I'd definitely be making sure I get at least another conditioning session done in that week. Um, so if I think back from the game, say I played the 90 minutes on the game. I think on a Saturday, I think or you can relate it to a Sunday if you want to, just push the day forward. But if I played 90 minutes on that Saturday, I would be having a rest day on the Sunday. On the Monday, I might be doing something little, but I wouldn't be doing anything high intensity. On the Tuesday, you've obviously got your training session, and I'm hoping that training session is a tough training session at your club. And then, if it's not a tough training session, you might look to top that training session up. But, I'm looking something like, 7 or 8 out of 10 in terms of hardness of that training session. So you walk off the pitch and actually that was a good blast. I would then probably do my extra conditioning work on the Wednesday. So in between your Tuesday and Thursday session, if that's the model that your club runs. And the reason being is I'd rather do it on that Wednesday, because on the Friday you're going to be wanting to ensure that you're rested for the game on the Saturday. So I would have a hard training session on the Tuesday. I'd do my conditioning work, and that might be that you're able to get to a pitch and do your conditioning work on the pitch. It might be that you can't get to a pitch, and you're going to be doing, like we said before, your road running or your treadmill running, or you might look to try and supplement that with some cross training, whether you do some bike work, but you're still getting a level of conditioning element out of that day. And obviously your Thursday would be your normal club training day, recover on the Friday. Some people feel better if they stretch their legs on a Friday, but I wouldn't be doing any conditioning session on that day. And then Saturday you play your game. So that's kind of like how I would look at it. So I do think you need to be doing something. I do think that Wednesday probably suits. If your training isn't hard enough, you can't just get away with doing 4 or 5 out of 10s in pre-season. You got to be doing 7 or 8. It's got to be tough.
Yeah, that makes good sense, mate. That's a nice breakdown, really, and nice insight as to what guys who maybe aren't training every day might be able to do to keep their levels high, or to at least push their level. So yeah, touching on recovery then, at what point do you suggest that guys do recover, and how might they recover? Like, pre-season is obviously all about fitness, right, and getting as fit as you possibly can, but at what point do you implement recovery into what you're doing?
Yeah, so I guess first and foremost, there's probably 3 non-negotiables for recovery for me, and something that you're going to be doing, and it's good just to get into your life and practice, like your everyday practice, whether you're trying to fully recover or whether you're in training or in pre-season or in season. The first one being sleep. Sleep's really important. And having a good sleep routine, ensuring that you're actually getting you're getting your 8 to 10 hours sleep every single night. You're getting quality sleep. So We know that if you're sleep deprived, your skill sets, your skills can drop off by 33%. And you probably don't even realize the extent of it sometimes. So actually ensuring that you're getting the sleep, so getting a good sleep routine, ensuring that you're not looking at blue lights an hour before bed. You're stopping your caffeine in the day. Make sure you've got a cool bedroom. You're doing your different sleep routines to help you to sleep. That's really important. The second one would be hydration. So we know that hydration, you're not hydrated, is going to decrease performance and increase injury risk. That's just a fact. So I think these days you can't get away with, not actually ensuring that you are hydrated. So you're regularly drinking water. And it sounds pretty common sense, but I think, that's a big part of recovery, right? And the third one being around nutrition. So ensuring that you are eating the right foods for fueling for competition from a carbohydrate standpoint. And then for repairing your muscles, you're having protein and your meals, and then you're eating, some good healthy vegetables just to keep yourself healthy. So if I just like to stick some numbers on them, and I think this changes throughout the week. Match day -1, you're probably looking to get 6 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of your body mass. So that's quite a lot of carbohydrates versus, if you're having to recover and repair after match day or on a match day +1, you're looking at 1.6 to 2 grams of protein per kilo. So it gives you some numbers to try and achieve within your nutrition. So that's non-negotiables. So then I'm going to go into something probably maybe unexpected, but when you're in your pre-season, you spoke about your objective is to increase fitness. So with a lot of players, and I've done it before, in pre-season, especially at Swansea, the first few weeks of pre-season, we wouldn't have done a lot of recovery. And the reason for that, I say recovery in terms of, ice baths and pool sessions. And the reason we wouldn't do that is because we're trying to maximize the adaptation that you get to your training. So if you think about when you do a really hard training session, you're giving your body a big load to cope with and deal and adapt. They call it super compensation. Is that you have this big stimulus, your body will drop off whilst you recover. You have to make sure that you have a period of rest for it to happen, and it will come back stronger. We don't want to reduce the hole that you get yourself into, reduce the stress that you put on that body by doing recovery modalities to offset that. So, actually the early parts of pre-season, we wouldn't do recovery in that specific sense, because ice baths, they reduce inflammation, so your muscles are having to deal with that if you don't do it, or pool sessions, you're increasing circulation and removing toxins from your body. So actually, create as much stress as you can, make the body adapt to it. And then when you get closer to in season or get closer to the end of pre-season, it's about when you start doing your actual recovery modalities to keep yourself fresh and fit.
I've never heard that before, mate. I've never been told, obviously, that recovery is not important, but that you shouldn't do it at some points in pre-season because you want to try and put your body through a little bit more stress. Is that relatively new in terms of sports science, or has that been around for a long time?
No, so I think it's pretty much. I think that's pretty, pretty accepted, pretty research accepted, that actually, recovery modalities blunt that you're looking to reduce the stress that you put yourself on. That's why you recover quicker, right? So it's pretty accepted, the fact that if you do recovery, if you don't do recovery, you'll probably get a better adaptation from it. But what I would say is I firmly am a believer in recovery. Definitely non-negotiables I spoke about before. Definitely in ensuring that there is rest periods. So you're not just going every single day. You've got to give your body that time to do the adaptation. And then and then being specific to the person and who you are. You know, if you're a young professional coming into your first pre-season, actually, you probably want to be doing a lot more recovery to ensure that you can cope with the load and get through it. But if you're obviously, you know, used to what's going on, or coping okay with what's going on, you know, don't do anything extra. It's just when you get closer to the actual season, when you want to perform, then I would start doing, you know, your ice baths.
That makes sense, mate. That was really insightful, mate. Actually, that conversation there. I know it's specific for pre-season, and we're sort of like mid July now, so it's this conversation is going to be a quick turnaround, and people will have this information pretty quickly, actually, as to how to probably maximise their pre-seasons and get the best out of themselves. To I guess to summarise, to finish, because we want this obviously to be basically a quick, very informative conversation. What would be your absolute non-negotiables for pre-season? Like what should people be looking to do? I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit and maybe get you to pick 3 of the main non-negotiables that people should be, or guys should be doing in pre-season.
Yeah, so I think so if I was to pick 3 things, or you know, I think the first and foremost is that you got to work hard. You got to, you know, actually, I mean, even if the session feels like it could be low intensity, I think you actually, you know, you need to ensure that you are working hard and driving the standards and performance and intensity. You know, the whole idea of the preseason is to work hard, right, to get the adaptation, to get change. So working hard is important. I think you've got to be, like I speak about consistency all the time, you know, actually you've got to be consistent. You've got to turn up every day. You've got to do your work. You know, don't take shortcuts. You've got to be consistent with what you're doing. And I think the third one would be 100% just listen to your body. So nobody knows, I'm probably going to add a fourth here in a second, but nobody knows your body like you do. So, you know, if you are really struggling, listen to it and give yourself some more rest. If you are good to go, listen to your body and you know, work that little bit extra harder. So you know, that's really important. Listen to your body, because I think the quicker you learn your body in the game, the more benefit you'll get to it. The quicker you learn what works for you, you know, what you've got to keep on top of in terms of maintenance. You could be a person that gets really stiff, right? So you need to make sure that you're working on your mobility, or you could be a person, you know, that needs to ensure that they're doing, you know, extra gym work to maintain their strength or to keep their knees healthy, for example. And then the fourth tip, which I had in my mind a second ago, and it's just alluded to me now. Listen to your body. Oh, and yeah, no, it's just taking ownership of your program. Don't rely on somebody else to tell you what to do. So I think you got to take ownership on what you need to do. Yeah, so if for example, you know, the session hasn't been put on for you, and you know that you need to do that work, well, you know, have the conversations and do it. Or, you know, if you're in a part-time model where, you know, you're training Tuesday, Thursday, and no one's asked you to do on the Wednesday, but, you know, it's probably the best thing for you to get fitter, you know, you're going to have to take ownership of your program, because don't rely on others to make you better.
That's well said, mate. And that's hence the reason why this podcast is called Leave No Doubt. We like to give people as much information as they possibly can to take ownership and responsibility of what they're doing. So, firstly, mate, I would like to say thank you very much for your time. I know that obviously you are, despite not having a pre-season at the moment, I know you're a very busy guy. So really appreciate your time and your insight. And hopefully we might be able to speak to you again, actually, because I know that this was a quick conversation and we can get stuck into a little bit more stuff that you know, around pre-season and you know, it's quite specific at the moment that's going to help people. So yeah, further down the line, mate, might be able to get you back on here and get some more gold dust out of you. That'd be great. No
problem, mate. Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And lastly, of course, like I don't always do this, obviously, for people that listen, but we'd greatly appreciate, obviously, your interaction. So whether that's just liking the content that you see, whether it's subscribing to our channels, if you have any questions, obviously, that are sports science specific that you'd like Dan to answer, then please just write your questions in the comments, in the reviews, anything that you need, just reach out to us. We're more than happy to help. Provide these podcasts for you all to get the best out of yourself and to become the best versions of yourself that you possibly can be. So lastly is thank you again to Connection Technologies for sponsoring this podcast. We really appreciate the help that they give us, and hopefully you enjoy this episode, and we'll see you again soon.